The sky had already collapsed by the time they reached the lower harbor. The monsoon didn't fall. It roared. A wall of liquid noise that erased the horizon and turned breath into labor. Elanor stood at the open ramp of the amphibious carrier, rain lashing her helmet, her braid plastered to the back of her neck. The deck lights were muted ghosts behind the storm. Ahead, the city glowed faintly through veils of rain, neon signs flickering underwater like drowned beacons. Streets turned to black rivers where the storm drains had long since surrendered. "Disembark," she shouted, her voice snatched by wind. Marines plunged one after another into the flood, rifles raised high above their heads, boots vanishing into the current. The water surged against their torsos, warm with oil and runoff. Elanor followed last, boots finding uncertain footing on the submerged asphalt. Sandbags broke apart nearby, spilling mud like blood into the current. Lightning split the sky in jagged silence, revealing their silhouettes in sharp relief, 12 shapes wading through chaos, reflections trembling in the surge. They advanced in a staggered line, every step a test of will. The city's lower grid was unrecognizable cars half submerged, storefronts drowned, power lines bowing under weight. The comms relay tower loomed somewhere inland, a red beacon blinking weakly through the gray wall. Eleanor's headset crackled with fragments of orders, half sentences shredded by interference. Copy relay, water line, hold position, then only static. She tapped the earpiece, but the rain drowned everything. Her gloves were already torn at the fingertips. The water stung where it found raw skin. The M4A1 she carried felt twice its weight, soaked webbing dragging at her shoulders. She moved with a mechanical steadiness, checking on the Marines nearest her Santos on point, Patel sweeping rooftops, Rayner bringing up the rear with the radio unit that hummed and hissed like an angry insect. The air smelled of ozone, diesel, and salt, and each gust of wind carried grit that burned against her face. "Watch the current," she called. "Keep your muzzle above the line." The rain drowned her words again, but the team mirrored her movements, rifles cradled above the surface, eyes forward, bodies bent against resistance. The water pulled at their knees like a living thing, whispering to take balance, to take footing, to take control. Each motion felt slower, heavier, like the storm itself was grinding them down grain by grain. They reached a collapsed intersection where the street vanished beneath a whirlpool of runoff. Elanor motioned them to halt. The squad huddled beside an overturned truck, its headlights flickering dimly under the surface, white beams diffused into the murk. Lightning again, closer this time, illuminating the flooded world in cold silver. Every surface glistened, every shadow moved. The storm had turned the environment into a hallucination, familiar shapes distorted by water and light. She glanced upward, the rooftops blurred, silhouettes wavering behind sheets of rain. Somewhere in the distance, a transformer exploded with a hollow pop, followed by a strobe of blue light that reflected in the water around them. "Power grid's going," Rayner said. His voice was thin, uncertain. Elanor didn't answer. She could already feel the hum of live current passing through the water somewhere nearby. Thunder rolled so deeply it felt like the ground itself was breathing. The platoon's second vehicle tried to close distance but stalled halfway down the block, its engine coughing before dying entirely. The headlights cut out. Elanor raised her hand, signaling halt again, then lowered it slowly, realizing the gesture was useless. Visibility barely stretched 5 meters. Rain beat her helmet in a steady, metallic rhythm. She thought about the objective reach the comms tower before the surge made the route impassable. They were already running out of time. Santos motioned her forward to the corner. The street beyond was worse floating debris, an entire vending machine spinning slowly like a buoy, glass bottles clinking against its sides. The water was nearly chest deep now. Elanor took a breath that tasted of salt and iron and moved first, because she always moved first. The others followed, silent except for the sound of their rifles clinking against slings and the hiss of the flood. Halfway across, a power line dropped. The snap was instantaneous, a white arc striking the surface. The shock traveled outward in a brief spiderweb of light. One Marine fell to a knee, yelling as the current brushed close, but it passed before anyone was hit. The flash left after-images across their vision ghost lines, colorless and infinite. For a moment, Elanor saw the reflection of her own helmet mirrored in the water, warped by the ripples, unsteady, faceless, part of the storm. The radio burst alive again. Echo 1. This is Control. Do you copy a fragment? Almost human. Control. This is Echo 1. Solid copy, she shouted back. Nothing. Just static. The line dissolved. Around her. The Marines were already reforming, adjusting straps, pressing forward. Lightning painted their faces pale and expressionless. The mission was simple, but the world had stopped listening. She led them along a flooded alley where shop signs swung from broken chains. A neon kanji sign still burned above a drowned restaurant window, red light rippling across the surface of the flood, reflected and fractured, civilization flickering underwater. Elanor slowed for half a second, just watching it shimmer, before forcing herself onward. The comms tower was still miles away, its faint beacon pulsing red through rain like a dying heartbeat. By the time they reached higher ground, a raised plaza overlooking the harbor, the platoon was reduced to moving shadows. Exhaustion had replaced adrenaline. Every inch of their uniforms clung to skin, every pouch heavier with water. Elanor paused, hands braced against a railing slick with algae. Below, the waterline swallowed entire streets. Rooftops became islands in a restless sea. She could feel the pulse of thunder through the steel beneath her palms. Raynor came up beside her. "Ma'am, it's getting worse. Tide's pushing in from the bay." Elanor nodded, eyes fixed on the horizon. The red beacon of the comms tower blinked faintly through sheets of rain, each flash weaker than the last. "We move anyway," she said, voice steady but distant. "We get there before it's gone." As they started again, the storm's voice rose thunder, consuming speech, wind screaming through the skeletons of buildings. Rain hammered the surface until it seemed the ocean was trying to reclaim the city one drop at a time. Elanor kept her rifle high, eyes on that single red light ahead. Around her, neon flickers melted into reflections. Torn gloves gripped wet steel, and water pressed against every step like gravity itself had turned liquid. She didn't think of enemies. Not yet. The battle had already begun, the kind without targets, without orders, the kind fought against the endless force of the world itself, somewhere between lightning strikes. She realized she wasn't moving toward the tower anymore. She was fighting not to be erased. By the time the second hour hit, the city grid was gone. Streets that once had lanes and curbs were now seamless, a black mirror stretching from block to block, broken only by the skeletal tops of streetlights and the spines of drowned vehicles. The flood had devoured everything that defined direction. Every surface reflected fire, lightning, and tracer rounds that hissed as they struck water, glowing briefly before vanishing beneath the surface. The storm had become the only force with authority commanding sound, sight, and breath alike. Eleanor's team had split somewhere near the tram line. Half the platoon lost comms after a lightning strike fried the relay antenna. The last thing she'd heard over the headset was Sergeant Willer's voice yelling coordinates. Then a crash and silence. They found his helmet later, wedged between two submerged sedans, the water churning red around it. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Elanor picked up the radio and pressed transmit, her hand trembling. Echo 1 actual. "This is Vega. I'm assuming command." Static answered, thick and endless. She lowered the set and looked around. 12 Marines stared back, waiting for an order that wasn't coming from above. "Form up," she shouted, voice cracking from the rain. They moved, slow and deliberate, rifles high, sloshing through chest-deep water. Every motion sent ripples of fuel and ash across the surface. The current tugged at their legs, whispering like a hand trying to pull them under. The world had gone monochrome except for the occasional flare reflecting blood-orange light across the storm. Elanor led from the front, her plate carrier dragging against the water, every strap soaked and heavy. A burst of tracer fire cut across the street enemy rounds from the rooftops. The glowing arcs sliced through rain, striking the water in molten streaks that sizzled out on impact. The Marines ducked behind a half-submerged city bus, pressing their backs against its cold metal shell. Steam rose where hot brass touched the flood. Rooftop. 2 o'clock, Patel shouted, but thunder swallowed his words. Elanor saw only the flashes indistinct, phantom bright, swallowed again by rain. Suppressing Santos fired 3 controlled bursts upward, the muzzle flashes reflecting in the water like a heartbeat. Elanor glanced down the flood, carried away each casing, spinning them off like sparks into the current. The storm blurred the line between sky and ground until they were fighting inside the storm itself, the city only a memory beneath the surface. Raynor slipped. One leg caught in a storm drain he couldn't see. "I'm stuck," he shouted, panic threading his voice. Elanor reached him in 2 steps, crouching low as the water hammered around them. She pried at the metal grate, gloves tearing on the jagged edge until her palms bled through the fabric. "Don't move," she said, gritting her teeth. The current slammed into them both. She found leverage, braced her boot against the curb, and pulled hard until the drain released him with a sucking sound. They both fell backward, water rushing over their helmets. Raynor gasped, clutching his freed leg. "You good?" she asked, shaking water from her goggles. He nodded, voice too hoarse to reply. She wanted to rest for just 1 second to breathe, but the storm refused even that. "Move," she ordered, voice low but steady. "Keep moving." They pressed on, using floating debris and the bus as cover. The current had changed direction, now flowing inland. Something massive must have ruptured, maybe the seawall or an underground reservoir. The water was no longer rising evenly. It surged in pulses, like the heartbeat of a living creature. A drowned sedan drifted past them, headlights still glowing faintly under the surface, twin eyes of yellow light distorted by motion. When the firing eased, they crossed into a plaza that should have been above flood level. It wasn't. Only the tops of benches and lampposts broke the surface. The faint glow of neon from a billboard, half submerged, now painted their helmets with trembling light. A woman's smiling face flickered on screen, glitching and reforming under the rain. Her advertisement for a brand long vanished, civilization flickering one last time before going dark. Elanor pulled out the map case from her vest and unrolled it under her poncho, but the ink had run, the paper swollen into gray pulp. She stared at it anyway, rain dripping down her nose, eyes scanning for lines that no longer existed. The futility hit her not as frustration, but as a cold, clinical understanding. There was no more grid to navigate, no coordinates to trust. They were ghosts wandering through the storm's memory. "Direction?" Ma'am Patel asked, his voice small against the thunder. Elanor folded the ruined map and shoved it back into her vest. "Follow the current," she said. "It's heading somewhere. We will too." They moved again, shoulders hunched, breath misting in the chill air. One Marine fired upward as another flare lit the skyline. The orange reflection danced across the water, haloing the squad in color that looked more like fire than light. For a second, everything slowed, the flood reflecting the flare's glow perfectly, turning each Marine into a mirrored figure of flame and shadow. Then the flare sputtered out, plunging them back into darkness. By midnight, they were alone. The radio was dead. The backup channel carried only the hum of atmospheric interference. The rain never lessened. Eleanor's arms burned from fatigue, her lungs raw from breathing water-laden air. Each step dragged, each order felt smaller than the storm's roar, yet she kept moving. The squad followed without question. Leadership, she realized, wasn't about knowing where to go, it was about refusing to stop. They reached the edge of the old marketplace, the current swirling faster there, dragging debris into a whirlpool that shimmered faintly with oil and light. Elanor glanced down and saw her reflection ripple helmeted, faceless, eyes hollow. The city glowed beneath her like a dying circuit board, colors muted and broken. "What's happening to it?" Santos asked quietly. She looked up. The rooftop seemed lower now. The water had not only risen, it had claimed more ground, faster than the tide should allow. The buildings weren't merely flooded, they were sinking, foundations sliding beneath the weight. The city itself was being swallowed whole, A deep vibration rolled through the flood, not thunder this time, but something structural, like concrete tearing under strain. Elanor steadied herself on a street sign half submerged and read the barely visible lettering, Harbor District. The word meant nothing anymore. The sea had moved in, and the land was forgetting its name. She raised her rifle, its barrel dripping water, and looked ahead into the black reflection that was now indistinguishable from the sky. Lightning flashed once more, and for a heartbeat the comms tower's red beacon blinked through the deluge. Then darkness reclaimed it. Elanor swallowed, breath slow, rain streaming down her face. "We're not just in the flood," she said under her breath, the words almost lost to the storm. "We're inside it." And as the squad regrouped around her ghosts with rifles held above the current, eyes catching the last dying neon, Elanor understood the truth of their new war. It wasn't against the enemy shooting from rooftops. It was against the drowning world itself. Whoever kept moving forward would define what survived. 3. Act 3. Tactical Struggle Battle. Suspended in midair, the night had swallowed everything that wasn't lightning. The flood had thickened into black glass, rippling under the rhythm of thunder and gunfire. Eleanor's remaining fire team's 6 Marines, stripped to the essentials of survival, moved through the drowned intersection like divers surfacing through oil. Every reflection threatened deception tracer glow, neon fragments, burning rooftops above, all mirrored in the endless dark below. Her boots dragged through chest-deep water heavy with ash and gasoline. The air itself seemed charged, humming like a power line about to snap. "Eyes up," she whispered, voice taut through comms that barely functioned. "1 round at a time. Move on my mark." Her words were eaten by the rain, but her team understood the rhythm of her hands, sharp, efficient, deliberate. They had learned by now to follow motion, not sound. The current pulled at their legs, each step resisted by invisible eddies spinning from unseen wrecks. Lightning illuminated the overpass ahead, jagged concrete ribs rising from the flood, slick with algae and rain, a sniper's nest carved into its shadowed crown. Elanor crouched behind a half-submerged sedan, her rifle steady above the surface. The muzzle hovered inches from the waterline, its reflection ghosting below like a twin weapon aimed at the drowned world. "Contact overpass. East side," she murmured. A heartbeat later, a bullet cracked past her helmet, slamming into the hood beside her. The splash followed, small and delayed, echoing against the facades of empty towers. The team ducked low, every muscle taut. Patel shifted left, using a floating crate for cover. Santos waded to a fallen street sign that jutted from the water like a blade. Thunder followed, rolling deep through the empty city, blurring with the hiss of the storm. It was impossible to tell where the sky ended and the street began. Everything was one continuous battlefield of sound and reflection. "Sniper's tracking movement," Patel hissed. "He's got a thermal scope." Elanor exhaled slowly, eyes scanning for rhythm. The sniper's pattern wasn't random 2 shots. Pause. 1 correction. A machine's logic inside the chaos. She waited for the next flash, then pointed upward, top of the bridge arch, 1 meter right of the collapsed girder. She called, "Suppressive fire." Now 3 rifles barked in unison, the muzzle flashes briefly turning the flood into molten light. Water leapt in fountains from the shock, fragments of metal raining down. Elanor surged forward, using the moment's blindness to advance, shoulders square, rifle braced tight. The rain hit harder, drumming her helmet like artillery. Each drop felt heavy enough to bruise. Halfway through the intersection, they reached the tunnel entrance beneath the overpass, a dark mouth swallowing floodwater by the ton. The tunnel was half filled, black and trembling with reflections from somewhere deeper inside. The hum of electricity was unmistakable. "We'll cross under," she said. "Stay off the walls. Move light." Rayner hesitated, his voice strained. "Ma'am, current's too strong." "Do it." Her tone cut like a knife. The storm had left no room for debate. They slid into the tunnel, rifles over their heads, water up to their chests. The floor sloped downward, forcing them to wade faster before the current took hold. Sparks flickered from loose cables dangling from the ceiling. each flash painting their faces ghost white. The smell of ozone and wet concrete filled their lungs. Then, a single scream. The light flared blue, then vanished. One Marine, the youngest, Cole arched backward, arms thrashing, as the current took him. The crackling sound came a second later. Elanor lunged, grabbing his harness, the shock slamming through both of them like a hammer. Her hands seized, pain white-hot, gloves burning at the seams. She dragged until the current released him. His eyes were wide but empty, mouth frozen open as if trying to breathe the storm. "Damn it!" "Cole's down," Raynor yelled. "Keep moving," she shouted, voice raw. "Move." They stumbled out the far side of the tunnel, collapsing against a concrete barrier. Eleanor's hands shook, fingertips blistered through the torn gloves. She stared at the body drifting away, armor glinting under lightning, slowly spinning, then disappearing into blackness. The flood swallowed him whole, leaving only concentric ripples fading into the storm. For a second, she wanted to scream, but the rain filled her throat before the sound could form. The sniper fired again, 2 rounds this time. The first hit the barrier, showering them with fragments. The second clipped the edge of Patel's helmet, knocking him sideways. "He's adjusting," Santos shouted. "He's walking the shots." Elanor didn't hesitate. She looked at the wreckage around them. Half-sunk vehicles, floating signage, debris caught between structures, and calculated an approach she hadn't yet measured. "Cover me," she ordered. Santos, left arc. Patel, "Give me 2 rounds high on my call." She broke cover, water exploding around her. The sniper's next shot missed, striking the rear of a bus half buried in the flood. She dove toward it, gripping the side mirror for balance as the current slammed her armor sideways. Her braid stuck to her neck, helmet slick with rain. She climbed onto the bus roof, boots scraping against slick steel, her weapon cradled close. The height gave her a partial view enough to see the overpass glowing faintly with muzzle flash between bursts of thunder. The air tasted like electricity, every breath charged and metallic. Rain poured down her face, streaking mud across her cheeks. She steadied her rifle on the roof's edge, eyes half closed against the deluge. The sniper fired again, the sound distinct, precise, mechanical, cold. Elanor fired back, her muzzle flash mirrored perfectly in the flood below, a brief twin of orange light cutting through the dark. Seconds passed without sound, the storm holding its breath. Then lightning struck behind the overpass, illuminating everything for a single frozen instant. She saw him helmeted figure crouched behind sandbags, scope glowing red. She fired again. The shot cracked through the rain, echoing down the empty street. The sniper fell backward, his weapon tumbling into the flood, swallowed before it hit the ground. For a moment, there was silence. The rain eased, not stopped, just softened, and the thunder rolled low and slow across the horizon, as if the storm itself were exhaling. Elanor lowered her rifle, muscles trembling from the effort of stillness. Around her, the water reflected the last flickers of muzzle light and burning oil. An entire city floating upside down. Santos and Patel waded up through the intersection, helmets shining under faint light. No cheers, no words, just the collective breath of those who had not been taken yet. Eleanor's eyes followed the drifting body of Cole until it disappeared beyond a bend in the current. Floating helmets bobbed like memorials, half visible, half forgotten. She adjusted her grip on the rifle, rain dripping from the barrel, and stared toward the skyline where the comms tower still blinked faintly red. The city pulsed beneath her like a dying animal, trembling under invisible weight. Her gloves hung in tatters, soaked with blood and rain. Her braid stuck to her armor, eyes hollow but unwavering. Above, lightning arced across the clouds again, pale and merciless. For a fraction of a heartbeat, the world was light, every rooftop, every ripple, every reflection suspended in perfect stillness. Then the dark returned, and the rain began again, heavier than before. The battle was over, but the war against the storm had only paused. Elanor exhaled once, quietly. "Keep moving," she whispered, not an order, but a prayer to the ones still standing. The thunder answered her, distant and rolling, as if acknowledging that endurance itself had become the only act of defiance left. The night fractured open with light. One instant there was only the storm rain hammering down, water surging through alleys, and then lightning struck somewhere near the docks. The sound was not thunder, but detonation. A shockwave rippled through the flood, a deep bass that seemed to move through the bones more than the ears. Elanor turned toward the flash and saw a column of fire rise behind the skyline, a red bloom expanding through sheets of rain. A munitions depot, one of the ones marked safe on their outdated map, had ignited. "Jesus," Santos whispered. The flood caught flame. It ran like veins across the city. Ribbons of orange fire chasing fuel spilled from wrecked vehicles, wrapping through the current until the black water itself burned. Smoke rolled upward, dense and oily, only to be slammed down again by wind and rain. The sky glowed copper. For a moment, it was impossible to tell where the storm ended and the inferno began. Elanor blinked through her goggles, rain hissing on their surface, every drop turning to steam before it hit the water. The bridge ahead, their last route toward high ground, was already half engulfed. Metal railings glowed dull red, slick with runoff and flame. Her team hesitated at the edge, silhouettes trembling in the molten light. "We go now," she shouted over the roar. "Stay tight, eyes forward." They waded onto the bridge, boots slipping on soaked metal, rifles high. Flames raced beneath their feet, consuming the oil sheen that slicked the current. The heat came from below, the rain from above, each drop a tiny explosion of steam. Eleanor's breath came fast, every inhale tasting like burned plastic and ozone. The air shimmered around her, each blink a strobe of lightning, fire, and shadow. Then came the voice, barely audible through calm static. "Help! This is Vega on the roof north of your position, please. The transmission cut." It wasn't one of hers. It was someone from another squad. Lost. Maybe already gone. Eleanor's eyes lifted toward the structure on the far side of the bridge, a building half collapsed into the flood. Through the curtain of rain, she caught a flash of movement on its rooftop. A Marine sprawled near the edge, pinned under debris, waving weakly. "Santos, take point Patel. Cover rear," she barked. Without waiting, she broke off and started for the building. The flood surged against her thighs, a living thing trying to turn her back. Flames reflected off her plate carrier, throwing red and gold over her marpat. She reached the building's outer wall and began to climb, gloves slipping on wet concrete and twisted rebar. The metal tore her palms. She felt the sharp sting of blood mixing with rain, running down her forearms in crimson streaks. Halfway up, another explosion went off closer this time, sending fragments of hot debris across the flood. Sparks clung to her gear, flickered out. She pulled herself over the ledge and crawled toward the wounded Marine. His leg was crushed beneath a concrete beam, his uniform scorched and blackened. "Stay with me," she said, her voice more command than comfort. She wedged her rifle under the beam, using it as a lever, muscles screaming. The debris shifted just enough for her to drag him free. The rooftop shuddered as more explosions sounded in the distance. She hooked her arm under his shoulders and began the descent, one slow, agonizing step at a time. Rain hit her back in sheets, steam curling off her armor as heat met downpour. The Marine groaned but stayed conscious, his hand clinging weakly to her torn sleeve. She gritted her teeth and kept going, boots slipping, knees slamming against the soaked wall until they reached the waterline. "Got him!" she shouted, her voice cutting through static. Santos and Patel moved to meet her at the base of the bridge, waist deep in water glowing orange from the fire's reflection. "He's hurt bad," Patel said. "Doesn't matter," Elanor snapped. "We get him across." The current was faster now, whipped by the storm and drawn toward the inferno's heat. The bridge was disintegrating piece by piece, sections of asphalt buckling, railings bending. "Form a line," Elanor yelled, arms locked. The Marines obeyed without question. 6 of them remained. They linked together, forming a human chain across the current, each one gripping the next by webbing and wrist. Elanor took the front, guiding the wounded Marine in her arms. The flood surged around her waist, pulling hard toward the burning section downstream. The fire reflected on the water in shifting patterns, red and gold rippling like molten glass. Every drop of rain hissed as it hit the surface, a chorus of tiny deaths swallowed by the roar. Above, lightning laced through black clouds, briefly illuminating their faces grim, focused, stripped of anything but endurance. Step hold step. Eleanor's voice was a rhythm, a lifeline, a metronome against chaos. One Marine slipped, the others tightened their grips, hauling him upright. Flames licked closer, crawling up the bridge railings, hungry and slow. The storm turned to steam, the air was white with it. Eleanor's breath came ragged, lungs burning from heat and exertion. "Almost there," she whispered, though the words were for herself. Behind them, a section of the bridge gave way with a sound like tearing metal. The structure groaned, sagged, then split in two. "Go," Santos yelled, pushing forward. Elanor hauled the wounded Marine higher, every muscle screaming. The fire surged across the gap behind them, devouring what remained of their path. They reached the far side as the bridge finally collapsed, the roar of steel and flame drowning out even thunder. Elanor stumbled onto the embankment, dropping to her knees. The Marine still cradled in her arms. He was breathing, barely. Her team collapsed around her, each one coughing, gasping, armor steaming in the cold rain. For a moment, no one spoke. The world was orange and black, the storm glowing from below, alive and furious. Elanor looked back at what was left of the bridge, a twisted arch of fire sinking slowly into the flood. The flames reflected in her goggles, painting her face in molten light. Her braid clung to her shoulder, soaked and streaked with ash. Patel sat beside her, trembling. "We made it." Elanor shook her head. "No, we just didn't stop." Her voice was raw, quiet, but steady. She glanced at the Marines, their faces lit by the dying fire. "Check ammo, check gear. We move when he's stable." As the inferno dimmed, rain fell harder, steam rising where fire met water, 1,000 tiny ghosts vanishing into the storm. The flood hissed as if breathing again, quieter now, but never still. Eleanor's hands throbbed where the gloves had torn, skin split and raw. She flexed her fingers once, then looked up toward the skyline. The comms tower still blinked faintly in the distance, its red light fractured by the haze. A promise. A warning. Both. Elanor exhaled, lifting her rifle, the metal hot even through her grip. "Up," she said softly. "We keep moving." The others rose around her, shadows against firelight, human forms in the shape of defiance. Behind them, the bridge collapsed completely, a roar swallowed by thunder. Before them, the city still burned and drowned at once, orange light dancing on black water, the storm's voice endless. And in that shimmering chaos, for one fragile instant, survival itself felt sacred. Silence arrived like a stranger. No thunder, no gunfire, no engines, only the slow, uneven drip of rainwater from shattered eaves and the whisper of ripples against half-drowned stone. The storm had passed in the night, leaving behind a city unrecognizable, a vast, still lagoon glimmering under a gray dawn. Mist clung low to the ground, veiling the wreckage in silver. The flood had flattened sound and motion. The world seemed to hold its breath. Elanor stood at the edge of what had once been a street. Now it was a river lined with debris helmets, shattered crates, sandbags unraveling into the current. Her Marpat uniform hung heavy and dark with water, every fold stiff with dried salt. Her braid was plastered against her neck, streaked with ash and grit. The rifle in her hands was slick, the magazine corroded at the edges. She pulled the charging handle once, more out of habit than hope, and listened to the dull, metallic click that followed. She waded forward through the shallows, boots sinking into the soft mud beneath the receding flood. Each step left a faint imprint that filled instantly with water, erasing itself. Around her, the remnants of the city shimmered faintly, windows reflecting pale sunlight through veils of mist, smoke rising from blackened rooftops. the skeletal outlines of bridges jutting from the fog. The air was thick with the mingled smells of fuel, salt, and rain-soaked concrete. It was beautiful in the way ruins sometimes are tragic, still, and too quiet to be real. Behind her, what remained of her platoon gathered along a raised embankment that jutted above the floodplain. 12 had become 6. They stood in silence, faces hollow, movements slow and deliberate, as if afraid of breaking the fragile peace that had finally settled. Helmets dangled from belts, rifles slung low. The only sound was the soft rustle of soaked gear and the occasional clatter of spent casings dislodged by the current. Santos limped past her, one arm in a makeshift sling. Any word from command he asked, voice hoarse. The voice was thin, broken by interference, but unmistakably human. It filled the silence like a memory of language itself. Santos straightened, eyes wide. Patel let out a breath that sounded almost like disbelief. Elanor closed her eyes for a moment, letting the sound wash over her. After so many hours of rain and fire and screaming wind, the transmission felt unreal, fragile as light on water. She tapped her radio once, thumb trembling. "Copy," she said quietly. "Echo 1 survivors holding position. Flood receding. Over." No answer came. But that didn't matter. She had spoken into the world again, and the world had answered, even if only in static. In that fragile stillness, the world was remade not through victory, but through the simple act of standing again when the storm had passed.